All right, welcome. So today I'm with Dave Daubert, who just spent 2 days with the region's 7 bishops. So we're all a little incoherent because of that. But Dave does some interesting work. He's a consultant. He's a parish pastor. He used to work for the ELCA. And Dave, you get around a lot. What's interesting that you find that's going on in the church today?
Well, I think actually part of what makes the church interesting is there's not a lot happening that's the same everywhere. There's a lot more creativity. If you go to one place or another, there's a lot more experimentation in the places that are doing a good job anyway. It's not a one-size-fits-all kind of a thing anymore. People need the courage to look at their own contexts, and where they're doing a good job at that, you start to see things bubbling up. You start to see creativity, teams of people working on stuff. I think that for me is what makes my work interesting, that if I go to 10 different congregations, unless they're all small and dying, and there are a lot of patterns for congregations that are small and dying, but when I go to congregations that are more vibrant and doing good work, there are consistencies there, but there are also such intricate details about what happens in this place in York, Pennsylvania versus this place in South Carolina, and big town, small town, pastors' personalities, lay people's personalities, history. The congregations are really laboratories now, if they're doing a good job. And again, it doesn't mean we don't have a lot of consistent patterns and a lot of things in common, but the best places aren't afraid to try things and are intentional about talking about, thinking about, praying about, discerning what it is that God is calling them to do, what it is their community needs, what it is that makes for a more vibrant faith, and that kind of work then results in place X doing something and place Y doing something else and place Z doing something else.
Anything specific come to mind that you've seen that kind of from a congregation?
Well, I think about a congregation that I worked with in Illinois, and their struggle on trying to figure out where they were going to be most relevant in their community. We do a lot of work with interviewing. I think congregations that are doing the best work are often out talking to people. They're not just myopically looking at their own stuff. And then when they do a lot of interviewing and start to glean stuff, then they start to look at, well, here's a lot of people who are talking about this, and we heard quite a bit about this and a lot about this. But 2 congregations, I guess, the one I mentioned in Illinois, another one in Ohio, both came to the same conclusion in different ways, that in their settings, mental health and drug addictions was a big deal. And neither of these congregations had any real history working in mental health and drug addictions, but as they talked to people, huge issue. And a lot of connections biblically with healings, and there's a lot of ways to root that in scripture and theology and practice. And so one started working on heroin addiction in particular. In their county, literally 52 people had died the year before in heroin overdoses, which is a person a week, almost all under age 25, a lot of them teenagers in early 20s. In Ohio, they're actually in a building stage of kind of designing something, and there what's exciting is, and you have to keep pushing on this, it's very interesting, we're trying to keep them, and they are doing a good job at not inventing their own thing from their own lack of knowledge.
Yeah, I was going to say, because a church to take on a heroin epidemic, boy, that's a steep learning curve.
And not only is it a steep learning curve, but it's also, you have to have a certain realism about what the task is and what you can contribute. And so the commonality in both places is that they needed to be involved in some way that wasn't, our congregation's going to fix this, but we're going to be part of the solution. And the attitude of being a partner, if there's a commonality that I see, the attitude of being a partner as opposed to a provider is radical. In fact, if there's one thing that helps congregations, the average ELCA congregation isn't a mega church.
Right.
We don't have lots of staff and gazillions of volunteers. You have to decide what you can do and how to maximize the gifts you have and the capacity you have. Congregations like these 2 both ended up partnering. And in Ohio, the big task is to try and keep them from planning something without mental health professionals and other providers in the room. And if they can do that, which they're working at, and they're doing okay, then the things they provide aren't, well, this is what our church can provide. but here's what we can be part of,
Okay.
which is a radically different way to do ministry.
Right. Right.
The old programming kind of thing where a church had to have this program and this program and this program, whatever they were, Sunday schools and choirs and all those things, I think is being replaced by knowing we need to be part of whatever God's up to and where the action is to make things happen. And a little church with 50 people can do that.
Yeah. Well, they've got resources. They've got a building. They've got space.
They maybe have 5 people who are really excited about it.
Yeah.
5 people couldn't do anything by themselves that would be very large, but 5 people can be part of a movement with 25 other people in the community to do something amazing. And the other 5 connections, because they're partners, actually make what they can do more, not less. So I think that's really
Yeah, I heard you kind of lay out a pattern there that sounds really familiar. Anybody from New England will recognize this. So one was a willingness to experiment. You called it a laboratory, that kind of a thing. Second was listening.
a lot
of listening to the community, not listening to ourselves, what we think the community needs, but going out and
got to get
hearing.
off your desk and off your pews and out and talk to people.
Right.
Just to be curious, to learn, not to sell the church, just to learn, listen. What is God calling forth from us, and how can we be involved? That's
Right. And then the third one was partnering. Not you don't have to provide everything, but you partner with other
Right.
people.
I think we get overwhelmed. If you try to compete with people who are good providers, say we're going to provide a good thing. Most of our congregations will get overwhelmed by that and just give up. And that's what we see time after time after time. Congregations feeling autonomous and self-reliant and self-responsible, not recognizing that 90% of what God is up to isn't involving our church.
Right.
And if we would just watch for what God is wanting to happen and who else God might be using, church people or not church people, that the resources are actually way bigger and our ministry grows exponentially because our vision grows.
I think our churches would be very different if we chose to measure those things. We've used these old we're still using the ABCs, attendance,
46
buildings,
people and
cash.
$104,000 budget.
Right. That's how we identify ourselves. But if we measure, well, how many people are coming into our building and receiving, heroin treatment or whatever it may be, that's a different thing to count. And then you start to see how God is using the.
Then I think the key also with that is, as you do get involved in those things, to not just allow the service providing piece to be the end point, but to build authentic relationships with people. And if you're building authentic relationships with people, then the task of being an evangelical presence in the midst of those is natural, as opposed to this, we don't have a relationship with people and we're supposed to go sell Jesus to people. Right. So we go out and pass out a flyer, invite people to church who will never come, or all kinds of things, and we feel demoralized and they feel put upon. So I think if we can talk about being involved in authentic ways in people's lives, inside the church with each other and outside the church with the people we encounter in community or in our own personal lives, because the vocation of the Christian goes all the time, that those relationships become the basis for a whole different kind of way of being evangelical as opposed to doing evangelism. And being a good news person is very different than being a Jesus salesperson.
Yeah. I think that the tendency in our congregation is probably most Lutherans aren't going to be, handing out tracts, but we're going to look at the partnership more as kind of renting out space. Well, we have this agency and they come and they just do that, and that happens on Tuesdays and Thursdays, but we don't have any interaction. You're saying, no, we want to be participants, get to know the people, the nurses, doctors, the clients, be there hosting, being hospitable.
No, one of the most helpful things a guy told me, I went to a workshop by a guy named Leith Anderson, you may know his name, he's the head of the National Evangelical Association, Wooddale Church, and in their church, Leith has caused a lot of trouble in the NEA because he's kind of a mainliner evangelical person.
Good maverick streak.
He's got a good maverick streak, exactly. But he talked about in his congregation at the Wooddale Church the commitment to getting people into the building and the commitment to getting people who participated in the ministry out of the building. And that one of the interfaces is that people in their congregation, when the congregation hosts something, whether it's the Boy Scouts or an AA group or whatever those things are, people in their congregation, somebody is required to greet them. We're glad you're here. Thanks for coming. We want you to know that this space is your space because it doesn't belong to us, it belongs to God. If there are other ways we can be helpful or in relationship with you, let us know. If this is your first time, the restrooms are down here on the left, whatever those things are. And there's enough alcoholics in most congregations. You can have an AA person greeting an AA person without breaking confidentiality and anonymity when you talk about scouts or neighborhood associations or whatever. So a real key is that not to allow your building to become just free tenant space, but to be a community center in which you are part of the community, not the landlord for the community. Mm-hmm. Show up at neighborhood associations if they meet in your building, and have people maybe even assigned to it, and so forth. But it is relationships that come out of that. I've been amazed in the place where I serve how many people from AA groups are coming to worship. And it's increased over the last 5 years, in part because relationships have brought relationships. Mm-hmm. So there's an exponential character to it, that if somebody comes and they're part of AA and then they say something to somebody in AA, the second person who comes doesn't come because we did something, but because an AA person does this thing. It's been very interesting to just watch that expand out of a few good relationships and the relationship that those people have. So I think that's a kind of a pattern.
That is a pattern, absolutely. I think you're right. Now let's talk a little bit about, so you went to this congregation in 2008?
Actually, I started in 2003.
Oh, okay.
I was there quarter time.
Okay.
My wife was a lay, non-rostered person. She was a social worker. And I was getting cabin fever working for Churchwide and needed a laboratory.
Okay.
Because I didn't want to be like the guy who could tell people what to do and didn't remember how to do it.
Right.
So initially it was just to keep myself from going stir crazy a little bit. It was semi-selfish motives, I confess. And my wife started seminary. She's now a rostered deacon in the church. And she works half-time and I work half-time. That's the arrangement we started in 2008. When I left my church-wide job, which was full-time, I was doing this on the side, we went to half and half, and then I started consulting. So it was a church that was on the brink of closure. They'd gone through initially closure discussions, and that looked like a good challenge. And I didn't need money because I had a salary, so we took a pretty good pay cut for my wife, and I got paid, a little bit. No benefits at that point because we had benefits from Churchwide. So we were able to offer sort of something to the congregation at a pretty big discount and still cover our stuff.
And this is a pretty fragile congregation at the time?
At the time it was, and all congregations that are under 125 or so are actually fragile, because it only takes one or two crises. So, but this was beyond fragile, I would say. It was a highly at-risk congregation.
Okay.
They had literally gone through conversations with another Lutheran church and a Presbyterian church about merging and closure. They hadn't pulled the string yet. So we started out just focusing on purpose, principles. I'd written a book kind of based on my experience there. The Living Lutheran book kind of grew out of that. But I did the process work with them the first few months we were there. Okay, why are we here? What's important to us? We did scriptural work. We had a retreat with leaders who came. We didn't get as many leaders as we would have liked, so we did shepherd meetings, and eventually pretty much 100% of the worshipers had a conversation about this, and we adopted it. And that gave us at least some traction on, okay, we are here for something, as opposed to, well, there's always been a church here as long as I can remember, which isn't enough. And then we started working through just a lot of things with leadership, getting to know community, started doing more things outside, reconnecting the congregation to people like the mayor, the local ministerial association more aggressively, being present with the school across the street. We've got a mentoring program now in the school where we mentor one-on-one with elementary kids who are at risk and things. So it began kind of this escalating relationship building, relevance and ministry building. And my wife, who's a diaconal minister and she has a master's in social work, did a lot of work with community issues, trying to help us be relevant in that way. So we've built, I think, a relational, socially conscious ministry that's fairly progressive theologically, because I'm more liberal than conservative. We're reconciling a Christ congregation now, and we've gone through a building thing where we just put an addition on to make handicap accessibility, so we just spent about $200,000 on our building to make it handicap accessible. So we've been very intentional about all are welcome, and we're going to do something to make sure that's true, which was very interesting. I thought we would fight about whether gay or lesbian people would be allowed in the church during reconciling in Christ conversations. I didn't think that would go bad, but I thought there'd be some. And the big question was not gay or lesbian people, but if everybody's welcome, what are we going to do about the stairs? So instead of fighting about whether gay or lesbian people were welcome, we took on a $200,000 capital campaign, impromptu in a sense, at our meeting. I was very proud of them, that they were so focused on why we're here and what we're supposed to do that they'd rather spend $200,000 to get disabled people in than fight about whether gay people shouldn't be in. So that was really an eye-opening moment. That was 2011. And I was very proud of them because I could tell they had arrived at certain identity points where they didn't need me to make good choices.
Sure,
and
right.
that was really exciting.
Yeah, that is good. That is good. And so today you're there half-time?
I'm half-time and my wife's half-time.
And your wife's half-time. And then the other half of your time, you have a consulting business that you do, Day 8?
Day 8
consulting?
strategies, yeah. I go out the other half of my time and I work with congregations. I work with judicatories like synods. I work with individual leaders. I do some coaching work with one-on-ones with leaders around leadership development or particular things in their area where we can develop support and accountability around a particular task. I teach in seminaries. I taught missional stewardship at Trinity on site last year on a Lilly grant. That was a flight a week for 13 weeks. That was very exciting. I enjoyed the class. I don't know that I enjoyed TSA 26 times.
Well, we'll put the links right underneath in the show notes of Dave's books, Purpose and Principles, and his consulting firm and so forth. But this is really good. Thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah,
It's great
all
to
right.
have you in ministry, and thanks for your ministry. I think you're doing a great job, and I think it's an exciting time to be the church. And the people who are excited about it being an exciting time are doing cool stuff.
Yeah.
And the ones who don't get excited are going to be in trouble, because if there's no passion for what we're doing, it's not going to happen on its own.
That's true. That's a good note to remember to leave on. Thanks.
Thanks, Jim.